I know where there's some, right here in the hall, clerk.
No, Molly, not in there. I have
Today, I wanted to show you that the turntable is all put back together. The plastic has all been cleaned up and polished. The metalwork is polished, although it's still a bit tarnished. I've done all the adjustments on the underside so that it changes records and works. Tone arm lifts and sets down in the appropriate place depending on whether you're playing 10-inch or 12-inch records. The next thing to talk about is what goes right there, other than a couple of bare wires. This is what comes in there, and I haven't touched this yet, but this is what we're going to talk about today is this pickup, this cartridge, this aluminum cartridge that came with the tuner. So let me get reset here and we'll get started. I'm going to start by talking about this thing. This obviously is a 78 RPM record. This happens to be Coleman Hawkins and the Swing 4 and Get Happy on one side and what? Crazy Rhythm on the other. It's not in great shape. It has some, some probably alcohol has been dropped right there and blurred the tracks. But it's just here for demonstration purposes anyway. And what I wanted to talk about regarding this was what it's made of. These are common. They started out in the 20s, early 20s. There were certainly versions as far back as the 1890s made, not unlike the quote-unquote modern 78. They changed a bit when everything used to be recorded on 78s live through a big horn, and then they got into electrical reproduction and amplified recording, electrically amplified recording in the 1920s, late 10s, 20s. And they lasted through the 50s. I'm of an age where I can remember you could still get these things before everyone transitioned to the long play record and 33 1/3 and 45 RPM records. So what's important about this relative to record players of the era of the 30s and 40s is what it's made of. These were commonly called shellac records, and there's a reason for that. This thing I'm holding in my hands is 30% shellac and 70% ground slate or ground limestone. In other words, rock powder is another ingredient here. There's a little bit of lubricant. They threw in there just a touch to get it to release from the mold. They're mold made. They get hot. The shellac is heated, pressed, and then released, and cools and becomes a record. But because of that particular combination, well, let me start by saying this. These had to be tough in a way because the only thing you could play them with, well, there are two things actually. You could play them with a steel needle or you could play them with a cactus needle, a cactus thorn needle. This was pre-diamond, pre-ruby, pre-whatever modern technology they're using today to make needles tough. So this combination of shellac and stone, 70% stone, was tough because it had to, in essence, grind away the phonograph needle. On the early days, they said play the record once with a needle, change the steel needle, then you can play it again. And if you look at old steel needles that have been around for a long time, they get pretty worn. And it's that trade-off between do you wear out the record or do you wear out the needle? And steel needles could be mass-produced like, straight pens. They were just really cheap to make. So you usually got a box of 20 or 50. And everyone had a little tin tub near the record player with a whole collection of steel needles. When they started putting in harder needles like ruby and diamond, sapphire, whatever else they used, they found that those really ate away at the record. So those hard needles wore these things out. So the steel kind of was the prevalent today. When you get a 78 RPM cartridge and stylus, it's usually diamond or ruby. And the great advantages of the modern cartridge, if you're playing an old 78 on a modern turntable, the cartridge weight, and this is off a Gerard I have sitting around. This doesn't weigh anything. You know, it has this isn't one for 78, so it would be marked specifically for 78, so it had a much larger stylus. This is a 33 1/3 stylus, but it's plastic. It's Radio Shack's version of a Shure, and it's just ounces, just grams light. Whereas back in the day, this is the Western Electric out of Racine, Wisconsin cartridge that came with the record player, and it weighs a ton. And I'll talk about tracking force here in a minute. But this steel needle would wear out probably equally as fast as the record itself, the groove itself. So they were destroying each other because of the tracking force. The modern ones with a modern diamond needles have such light tracking force that they won't destroy the record. If you put a diamond tip, a diamond stylus in this and played it normally, it would chew right through the material and destroy the record. So it's still steel. So I wanted to talk today about this thing. This is probably the original cartridge. It's certainly, as you can see, it's all badly corroded, and I'm 100% confident that what was in here was a Rochelle salts crystal. Rochelle salts are a man-made crystal, human-made crystal. They were actually discovered, way back. When? 1824. Well, they were first formulated by an Apocarthy in around 1675, just as a crystal. 1824, a guy figured out that they create electricity when they're vibrated. And so what's in here is a Rochelle salts crystal, and those are made up of, in essence, cream of tartar and sodium bicarbonate. You cook those guys down, and they'll in distilled water, then let them cool very slowly, and they'll form crystals that are have a piezoelectric effect. You bang them and they generate electricity. Now, one of the differences between this and this is when this was working, when this Rochelle salt crystal worked, the output on these, it's mono obviously, but the output voltage on these pins right here was really high. It was somewhere between 2 and 4 volts peak to peak for the signal coming out as it was playing the record. This guy right here has an output of 3 to 6. This is a moving magnet cartridge. It has an output on here of 3 to 6 millivolts. So it's tiny compared to this. And the deal is that my Zenith turntable and amplifier, radio amplifier, are built to receive a signal from the cartridge as it's playing a record of 2 to 4 volts peak to peak. This will generate some signal, but it will be so slight you'll have to turn the radio up all the way and the amplifier up all the way to get even a little bit of noise out of it. So this isn't going to work very well at all. I wanted to talk about one other thing regarding these two cartridges, and that's tracking force, and that's how much force the needle, when this is all assembled and back on its tone arm and everything, how much pressure the needle right here puts onto the record. This guy, and most of the record players from that era, have a tracking weight of around, this one I weighed, and it has a tracking weight of around 45 grams. Whereas this one has a tracking weight of about 0.75 grams, which is, so this is way heavier than this is. This one just kind of floats along the record, which is the way it was designed. It's designed to not tear up the LP. And there's another huge difference between these two, and you won't be able to see them here. But the needle size, this needle is humongous compared to the needle you can't even see on there. So I did a drawing, which will show you a comparison. This is a drawing of a 78 RPM record groove, and the specs for a record, for a 78 RPM record, are this gap at the very surface of the record right across here is about 7 thousandths of an inch. The depth of the groove is about 2.9 millimeters, not quite 3 millimeters. And most styluses that they recommend today, styli, are about 3 mils wide. And at 3 mils, they ride right about the center of this track. If you go from the bottom of the groove up to the top, the side is where all the information is stored, and the sound is stored. And at about 3 mils, they go about in the middle of the track from side to side, which points out the reason why you don't try to play a 78 RPM record with a 33 1/3 stylus, which is 0.75 mils, and that's because the 33 1/3 stylus drops straight to the bottom of the groove and just plays dirt and debris and noise. It's not going to do you any good, and with a diamond tip, it'll start to gouge a pit right in the bottom of the groove itself. So that's why it doesn't work. You need something big and fat enough to fill the space, and when you get a special 78 stylus and a special 78 cartridge for your modern record player, it will ride about right where it should. There's some argument whether it should be, slightly less than 3 mils or slightly more, and it kind of depends on each record. Sometimes the data, the groove, the walls of the groove are worn away at the bottom, but are fresher at the top. In other cases, the top of the top edge of the groove has been damaged by handling or something, and you get better sound lower down on the wall. So it all depends. Purists say you need three or 10 styluses of all different sizes to appreciate a 78. I don't subscribe to that, but that's just me.
The makers of Johnson's Wax.